Hi, Bob Bartlett here with the Ubuntu Fly Anglers Network and iFishIBelong, and the host of our podcast series, On the Reel. This podcast is coming to you from eastern Washington State and the ancestral lands of the Spokane Confederated Tribes. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we are a small group of black and brown fly anglers, environmental activists, and educators from across the country and Canada. This podcast is consistent with our mission to make visible folks like us who live the outdoor life. It is an attempt to get real with our guests on matters that mean the most to them as black and brown folks who are environmentalists, educators, and environmental activists. So right now, I'm going to introduce today's guest. This is a special human being, someone I've got to know over the past several months, and so I'm really excited to introduce this well-traveled, fresh, saltwater fly angler and resident of Indiana, Albert Al White. Al, welcome to the show.
Bob, thanks for having me. I truly appreciate you giving me some time to connect with you on your podcast.
This is truly so cool of you to take time out because I know you're busy. I know you got things going on, and we'll get to that
A little bit.
busyness. Yeah, a little bit of that busy life that you live. So I appreciate you taking the time out to hang out with me and to our listening audience and hopefully our viewing audience because we're also on YouTube. So Al, let's start this off with the easy things, right? And I have
Sure.
some questions here. I actually wrote them down because I didn't want to miss anything. So because I know enough about you that I'm like, gee, where do I even start with this bro? He's
I think you're
intense.
overselling me, first of all.
Oh, no,
So
no, no, no.
hopefully I can live
Oh,
up to the
babe,
hype.
look, you will, bro. I'm confident of it. So let's start with the easy stuff. All right. So
Yeah.
where are your people from? And you know what I mean when I say people.
Yeah. So, I myself grew up in Dover, Delaware.
Oh,
Dover is the capital home of Dover Air Force Base, which
ah,
many folks would know is the morgue, if you will, for the military. So, anytime we have fallen soldiers,
mm,
they make their way through there. And oftentimes you'll see that televised on some of the major news networks. But my father, grew up in New York and met my mother, who's from a small town in Delaware called Smyrna. And that's where most of her family really came from, is kind of that local area, not too far from Dover. But they actually met in college. My dad is what they would have called a city slicker and made his way down to what we call back then, certainly, was the country, Delaware State college, which is now Delaware State University. And so, yeah, they met there and obviously got married and kind of made their home in Dover, if you will. And that's where I grew up. I was actually born in Philly, but they moved to Dover, after a couple of years. And that's where I spent kind of my, kind of formative years, if you will.
mm. Yeah, I gotta admit, bro, you're the first brother I know from Delaware. So
It's, it's,
I don't know anyone
I,
else but you.
Yeah, I will say that is something I get at least a couple of times a year, that you're the first person that I've met from
Hmm.
Delaware is normally what I get. So that's all right. I'm used to it at this point.
So that's awesome. So how did you get from there to where you currently are? Can you walk us through your growing up days and how you ended up in Carmel, Indiana? I believe that's where you're from.
Yeah, Carmel, Indiana is it. My goodness, man, where do I start? It's an interesting upbringing. I often tell people that I'm really fortunate to be where I am because I don't think mine was necessarily a traditional upbringing. My father was in and out of lockup. He was at that time what you would consider to be a large drug dealer. My mother
Hmm.
was a school teacher. They divorced early on. The one good thing I always had going for me is that she had a circle of friends that were educators and professionals and things of that sort. So I always knew college was somewhere in there, but nonetheless, I did absolutely gravitate towards, the other side, if you will, and, found myself experimenting with drugs personally or using drugs, and then even um, selling drugs,
My
and
goodness.
wound up getting arrested at some point in time when I was in high school, I believe. It's right before, actually, it was the summer before my senior year, so terrible timing. But that said, again, I think about the support that I had from my mother, our extended family, as well as her friends. And again, so I always knew that
Mm.
there was this piece around education, and so I just tell people I had a lot of fun getting to that point. But eventually, I graduated from high school on time. I was very fortunate that the judge didn't, send me to juvie, if you will. Allowed me to go to finish high school and go to college, and graduated with an agribusiness degree in
Wow.
1992, and being a third generation at Delaware State University. So a lot of pride and tradition as that goes as well.
That's amazing. Thanks for that transparency, bro. That's
It's part of who I am. I mean,
yeah,
I don't know any
yeah,
other way
yeah,
but to be
uh-huh.
transparent.
Yeah, yeah. That's yes. I hear you. So you
And
you finish your oh, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, no, and then I was going to say, so I graduated with an agribusiness
Mm-hmm.
degree,
Mm-hmm.
and then found my way out to Middle America, to which I knew absolutely nothing about. In fact, I can remember my first assignment was in Champaign, Illinois, and I can remember getting off the plane, and I had never been to Illinois, and seeing nothing but corn for miles, and I just thought to myself, what in the hell did I get myself into at this point in time? Because I just knew, nothing about it. And I didn't grow up on a farm on top of that. I just knew there was an opportunity to be gainfully employed when I graduated. So I was like, hey, I'll major in agribusiness. And, so from there, I kind of soaked it up. I learned a ton about business in general, not just agriculture as a whole, and traveled a great part of the U.S. Within that role and a couple of other roles when I was in agribusiness. And from there, I made my way to Indianapolis, Indiana. Um, Believe it or not, for about, what did I stay out there for? About 9.5 months, before then moving over to Iowa, where I did some training, and then ultimately landed in Wichita, Kansas, with a new company, and spent probably 3.5, 4 years, maybe almost 5 years there before um, I was moved out to California as an area trainer, and then pretty much traveled almost all of the Western Third was my territory. And again, just learned a lot, saw a lot. You really get an appreciation for everything that the United States has to offer right here. You know what I mean? You don't
Mm-hmm.
have to travel abroad to really experience some very cool locations. Um, but during that time, I also learned about the pharmaceutical industry. And most of the pharma companies back then were kind of like chemical companies. And so, they would have a turf and ornamental, they might have an industrial, section or organization within the umbrella company. And so I was like, man, this pharmaceutical industry thing looks kind of cool, and joined our pharma industry, and eventually made my way back to Delaware, where I got to hang out with the family for a little bit. I've now got, at least one child, I believe at that time, no, two. And, things, you just make this big circle. And then ultimately they moved me out to Indianapolis, where our home offices are. And after a couple of moves, I've pretty much remained out here from this. So that's, how I got to Carmel in kind of a long, long way.
So you've always had the travel bug. Sounds like. I mean, so the fishing part that we'll get to here in a second kind of
Yeah,
fits in, right? Do you mix business with
absolutely.
pleasure? Like you like to go places or you fish where you travel ever?
Now, it's a really good question. So, in my current role, I don't travel near as much, and when in the roles where I traveled the most, I wasn't into fishing yet. So there might be the occasional, um, go out on a I forget what you would even call them. It's the larger kind of party boats, if you will,
Mm,
right, where you kind of
yeah.
drop your rod and they say, crank it up three, and the next thing you know, you've got a fish on type of deals. And, to me, for what I do today, that's not exactly what would interest me. But at the time, certainly, I suppose it was fun enough. The one, I will say the experience that kind of started introducing me to fishing when I lived in Wichita, I
Yeah.
used to take customers down to Lake Texoma and we would fish for stripers or hybrid striped bass, excuse me.
Mhm.
And so I got a little bit of the bug there. Obviously, we were fishing gear, but it was absolutely a blast. And so, that's where I kind of got my first taste, I would say,
Mhm.
of fishing before getting the opportunity to finally start making enough money. We could take some nice vacations and we do a little bit of offshore fishing down in Florida and, things of that sort. But as far as really mixing business with pleasure. I never got to do it in the sense of fishing. Now, what I will say is, as I look at my travels today, pretty much wherever I'm going to go, if it's my choice, I am looking to see what kind of fishing I can do. So I really kind of plan my trips, especially with the kids who are now young adults, around my opportunity to fish. But we still obviously get to hang out as a family and do things, which is also important.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds good. And Nat, I can't waste this moment. So, you're actually a professional drug dealer. I just had
that's
I just
exactly
had to I just had to
that's
drop
exactly right.
that.
That's
See if
that's not a first that I've heard
you've
and,
heard
and
that,
and
right?
actually
I'm
used
sure.
myself, frankly.
Well,
Yes, that's
this
exactly
is
right. I made the
hi.
transition at some point in time.
Yeah, hi. I'm Al White. I'm a drug dealer. Where's the fish? But anyway, that's awesome. So then you did the gear thing, off the boat thing, and but I know there's more to this story. So when did
Oh
you
yeah.
have that at moment where you're like, huh, what's this thing called fly fishing? When,
Yeah,
when
so
did you have that moment? And who led
I
you there?
yeah, I started fishing, I would say it was probably around 2015, 2016.
Oh, wow.
And I went out and bought one of those combo sets of
Mm-hmm.
an ugly stick. So it
Oh,
was a spinning reel setup. So that's where I
yeah,
started.
yeah.
And, the next thing you know, I'm kind of pond hopping everywhere, right? To just chasing largemouth as much as I could. And I absolutely enjoyed it and then quickly started upgrading my equipment and moved over to a bait caster, which I just absolutely loved. Um, but I was getting bored with, going from pond A to pond B, going back to pond A and things that sort. So one of my colleagues said, "Hey, there's a guy that does guided trips on Sugar Creek, which is a river here locally, probably about 45 minutes or so west of Indianapolis, and it's for smallmouth. And I hadn't fished for smallmouth before either, and I wanted to cover more water, right?
Sure,
And
sure.
so I ended up connecting with Chad Miller, who is a good friend to this day, as well as a mentor to me.
Awesome.
And, he knew I had the fishing bug. I started fishing with him, on multiple trips throughout the year. And he said, Al, one of these days, you're going to start fly fishing. You realize that, right? And I told him, this is what I'm thinking about, maybe bass tournaments and stuff like that. And I
Mhm.
said, Chad, I'm going to be honest with you. I really don't see myself doing that. And, he didn't say anything. And so time kind of goes on, probably fast forward a couple of years. And I used to coach soccer with a really good friend of mine. I coached my own daughter in
Mhm.
soccer as well as my son, but then a good friend of mine whose kids are behind mine we started coaching his twin girls. And there was a young lady on the team that we call Lolo. And I got to know her parents really well. And they have a property out in Big Sky. And
I'm sorry,
Steve,
is that Big
the
Sky as
dad.
in Montana?
Yeah, sorry about that. Big Sky,
Okay. No,
Montana.
I'm just
Yep.
checking because my daughter lives
And
close to Big. She was married in Big Sky.
very good. Just a beautiful part of the country.
Oh, yeah.
And I hadn't been before, and he invited me out to their home. But he also set up some fishing trips for us, and I
Mm.
didn't know what we were going to be doing. In fact, I didn't even realize we were going to be fly fishing initially. And so we go, and little do I know, the first day we're fishing the Gallatin, which is
Yeah.
where they filmed, part of a river runs through it. And then the second day we're doing a float on the Madison, which are two bucket list,
Yeah.
fisheries that I had no clue what I was fishing. But what I do know is I caught some trout and I had a really good time. And I was like, this is pretty cool. And so Christmas comes around. I got a buddy who's going to get married in Mexico. And I said, you know what? I'm going to buy a fly rod and reel combo. I'm going to treat myself. And I go out and buy this nice setup, a hatch reel, Scott fly rod.
Oh my
And
goodness,
then,
bro!
yeah,
You went.
yeah.
You didn't
I said I
walk
was
it.
going to
You
treat
didn't.
myself,
You
right?
didn't go into a fly shop and make the mistake of saying, "Gee, I'm trying to get started." What can you? Because I've been
No,
there. I've been in fly shops when that's happened. I just have to leave. It's gonna get interesting.
that's exactly right. Really, Chad helped me with that, and I told him I wanted to treat myself, and I was going
Well,
to be saltwater
he
fishing.
he
And I
fixed you
think
up.
Chad was, Bob. He was kind to me because probably he's sitting there thinking this kid hasn't thrown a fly rod but a
Yeah.
few times now at this point. But he didn't tell me, how hard saltwater fly fishing would
Oh
be.
yeah.
But what actually happened is, um, COVID, the pandemic hit, and so we didn't get to go,
Oh no.
not at that time anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So it was probably, at least that part was best for me because I would have made an absolute fool of myself. I didn't really know how to cast at that point. And imagine me trying to cast for tarpon,
Oh yeah.
with about 3 months of fly fishing under my belt. um
That's amazing.
but yeah, yeah.
Wow. Go ahead, keep talking. I'm just like that with 3 months and you're chasing the biggest fish and the hardest
Yeah,
fighting
yeah.
fish
So
on the
we
planet.
didn't. Yeah, or supposed to be, but again, it did not happen. But what
Yeah.
did happen is I went out and got like a 6 weight setup. Again, recommendation by Chad. Say just try it, see what you think, and really begin to start getting into fly fishing, especially once you get that that first really nice bass. And at this point, it would have been a largemouth for me because I was still kind of pond hopping at that time as I was learning. But I was spending every moment that I had of downtime, um, you know, chasing bass with a fly rod. And quickly, my gears started to go from 9 to 10, kind of spinning and bait casting, rod and reel setups, to eventually it was maybe 50-50, to now I've got probably 10 different fly rods, and I think I've got 2 to 3, kind of gear setups that if I use them twice a year at this point is a lot. And one real quick story I think that
Yeah.
really kind of sold me on fly fishing is, Chad said, look, if you want to get good at fly fishing, you got to stop picking up
Oh.
your bait caster, because I would fish with him on sugar, and I'd maybe do a couple of casts and be like, yeah, I'm gonna go back to what I know I'm comfortable with. And so we made this deal. This one day we were going out that I'm only going to fish the fly rod. I'm only going to throw the fly rod. And so I'll never forget, we're on a stretch that I actually fish quite often now. Um, and we're throwing poppers, and I'm just making a mess, right? I'm kind of halfway tired, my swing's getting a little bit lazy. And he's like, Al, you know what? Why don't you just put the rod down? Just take a minute, put the rod down. And I said, let me just make one more cast, Chad, one more cast. And I throw that popper out there, and lo and behold, it just gets eaten by a 22-inch smallmouth.
Oh.
And for anybody who knows anything about river smallmouth, that's you're chasing the 23, but to get a 22 as one of your first real smallmouths on the fly is something that a lot of people would dream of. And so now the fight is on, and we're kind of both going crazy and want to make sure we land it. And I still have the video and pictures of that fish, and certainly a memory I will never forget as my first 22. So
Is that? Do I have that picture? Did you send that to me once? Of you holding?
I
You're holding
I
a
I
really
may
big
have, but
so
if I haven't, I'm happy
yeah,
to
please
send it
do,
to you
please
because it
do.
is a pretty special fish.
I'd love to see that. Well, it's interesting that
Absolutely.
you've come to this recently. You've come to this thing called fly fishing recently. But
Yeah.
one of the things, Al, that I've because I'm a obsessed streamer junkie.
Uh-huh.
I throw streamers 99.9% of the time. I don't know what I'm doing that other, but I should just say 100% of the time. I throw streamers, and I love chasing big fish with streamers. But one of the
Yeah.
interesting things that is in the literature and the big names in streamer fishing, like George Daniels and others, uh, what they often credit uh, streamer fishers, fly fishers, that throw
Hmm.
streamers, their success to is watching and paying attention to bass anglers.
I've heard
So
that
so
before.
you came about it in the way that the professionals say, uh, that's that's how we do this. That to be a good streamer person, you need to pay attention to how bass anglers treat their lures, whether it's a
Right.
popper or a
Swing bait or
spinner, a
whatever the
swing
case
bait,
may be.
you know,
Yep.
because they don't just throw it out there and look at it, right? They're
Yeah.
constantly trying to get that bite, and
Yep.
so
You're
all the
working
people
it.
that Kelly Gallup over in Ennis, he was one of the first really popularized streamer fishing in Wyoming, Montana rivers. He says that all the time. The really good streamer folks are folks that came about the sport by watching, paying attention to, doing the spinner game. But that's an amazing story, and the fact that you, like I said, you came into this, sort of recently. I would say 20. You said about 2022 was when you started.
Yeah, I mean, to,
Yeah,
to say I got serious with
yeah,
fly
yeah,
fishing,
yeah,
yeah, I'd say you're probably
yeah,
about right.
yeah,
Late
yeah.
21 to really probably 22.
Right.
Yep.
So I know where you're likely to go with this, so I'm going to preempt your answer to this question because I love to ask people. Well, first of all, I think you've nailed your home waters, right? Your home waters, what you would consider your home waters are. You want to put that on blast? What are
Yeah,
they?
yeah. No, for me, look, we've got the White River that runs right
Okay.
through the city. It's a great fishery, I think, that's underappreciated
Mm,
for really good smallmouth fishing as well as other species. And then, the river I absolutely love because I think it's just a beautiful stretch of water is Sugar Creek. And then I also fish Fall Creek and Eagle Creek. Fall Creek and Eagle Creek both sit within the city proper, where parts of it go
okay.
through the city proper as well.
And those are all smallmouth waters, then, pretty much. You have trout
Yeah,
water
but
close by.
we do not have trout water other than what they drop in over the late fall and winter.
Okay.
No, we do not have
No, that's
trout water per
okay.
se.
Well, the question I was leading up to here, which, like I said, preemptive strike, because I know to ask you what your favorite species is. When I ask that of a lot of people, they're like, if it swims, right? If it has
Yeah,
fins.
yeah, yeah.
I get that. But do you have a particular freshwater favorite?
Look, I mean, certainly, if I'm sitting in Indiana anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's smallmouth all day, and I think
Okay.
smallmouth pound per pound are some of the fiercest
Okay.
or
Yeah.
fiercest fighters out
There you go.
there.
Okay.
Um, and again, I'm probably a bit biased, but I'll tell you, I was just out on the White a couple of weekends ago,
Mm.
and I got into some decent smallies, but even the pound and a half
Mm.
are just putting up this incredible fight with a 7 weight, right? And so that's the part I love. And then they like to give you a little bit of airtime, right,
Mhm.
with their acrobatics, man, and so that never gets old. Seeing the fish come out of the water as it's trying to spit the fly.
Sure, sure. So bass and then streamers are your tactic,
You know, uh,
your preferred
it's
method.
interesting. I If there's an area I want to continue to focus on, it's my streamer fishing because I don't think I'm a what I would call a good or really good streamer fishing. I
Mm.
think I'm just okay. I love throwing poppers, top
Mm.
water all
Okay,
day
right,
if I
right. Yeah,
could.
sure.
And then we make our way into, as you get into the late summer, when the water gets low and slow, we then get into terrestrial fishing. So, essentially a dry fly, if
Sure.
you will. And there's nothing better. Then you've got the little guys that are just full of what, and will just explode on that thing, right? But then you've got these larger fish that
Sure.
will just come up and sip it. And if you're not paying attention, you turn your head for 1 second, your line is tight. But for me to watch that thing just drift with the current, and again in slow low water, I don't think there's anything better. So I'm more of a top water guy
Okay.
all day than I am a
Well,
streamer. Although I love
sure.
a hard hit on the streamer, I will say
Sh-
that.
Sure. Well, I'm just looking at your shirt there, and I see that big all hopper there, and I was thinking that was
That's right.
probably like, but I'm not trying to be too cute here, but I've got to take open my shirt here since you're wearing yours, but I don't know if you can see this. Let me get that over
I can't.
there.
Your picture's small.
Okay. Well, there's a big old German brown, and they're eating a streamer. Okay.
That's what I was going to say.
On
It looked
on
like a fish. Okay, a
on
trout.
on my undershirt here. So not to
Yeah, yeah.
undress, but
I can
just
dig it.
just to be complimentary of the hopper thing here. So that's awesome. Now I also know that you like saltwater. That
Oh yeah,
you go to salt whenever you have a chance.
I do.
What's your favorite destination for salt, and what is your preferred species there?
So this is kind of tough for me, right? Because I still consider myself relatively new to the sport.
Sure.
And so it's kind of one of those things of where did I go last becomes my favorite, right?
Yeah, me too.
And I probably go back there a time or two until I experience,
Yeah.
another destination or location. So I will tell you, I have a fondness for the Bahamas and
Mm.
chasing those big bones. We go down in the area of Freeport, and I absolutely love it. That said, um, I've started fishing down in South Florida. My brother lives in Fort Lauderdale with his family. So I've done some Everglades fishing with Drew Rodriguez of Drew's Guide Service um,
Okay.
for peacock bass.
Sure.
But most recently, Drew was busy. I called him on kind of short notice, and he was tied up. And he said, "Hey, I know this other guide." I figured I'd just be going for peacock. His name's Alex Zapata, and so gave Alex a call, and he happened to have a day, and this was over the holidays in December,
Mm.
and we went out and chased snook and sea trout. I missed on my reds. I didn't have it all together, and I completely blame it on me. Alex is a heck of a guide. He's also an instructor as well. So just a great combination when you've got those two to really be able to, learn how to hone in your skills
Mhm.
and as well as put you on fish. But I ended up coming back. He's like, look, you got to come down, and chase some tarpon. And I hadn't caught a tarpon on the fly. And so it's the end of February. I'm fishing with him for 2 days. First day, we knew we were just going to chase bones given the water temps and stuff, but he thought things were changing. That the next day we would, maybe start with bonefish and then go for tarpon. But I drive down to Isla Mirada. Have no idea where I'm going other than I know I'm going south and there's water kind of on both sides of me. And I get down there And I see him and he's like, "Hey, we're going straight for tarpon." And there's no looking back. And I'm like, "Deal, I'm going to follow your lead. So let's do it." And so we're fishing. And Bob, I don't know if you've been tarpon fishing, but it's
No.
not easy in the sense of it kind of ebbs and flows. You're going to see, schools come through. You might see a onesie, whatever the case may be, but then it kind of dies down. And then they're just not an easy fish. And we were looking for big tarpon on top of that. And so there was a lot of learning that was taking place earlier in the day. And, I was making some casts and getting it out there, but not getting any bites. But it was so cool to see these big fish again, sometimes in schools. And he told me when it's at the height of the season, there could be 200 of them, which I could not imagine together. We were seeing, our biggest school was probably six or so, but you see these big shadows kind of slowly moving in the water, and then they come up for some air. They call it blooping, and so just to be in the setting alone was really cool. Now we get past lunchtime and it's hot and we haven't caught a fish yet. And I'm now getting to that point where I'm like, well, if I just hook one and we don't bring it in, because oftentimes you'll lose them on the jump and stuff like that, I'll be happy with that. I just want to, say that I got the hook, an Isla Morada, tarpon, and Al White is going to be happy. And so we're not catching anything, and he's making this long run. And I know this is like, all right, Alex is going for the last ditch effort. I appreciate, what he's trying to do to get me on the tarpon. Let's see if we can make this happen. And so we're seeing a few tarpon, and he finally spots two or three, and they're out. I don't know. I'm going to say maybe 30, 40 yards from us, but they're obviously coming towards us, and he's on me to start making that cast, and he starts giving me the instructions: strip, 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 slow. And I lost the tarpon for a little bit, and the next thing you know, my line just goes absolutely tight and then just takes off. I mean, takes off, and then all hell breaks loose. And I'm so ecstatic. You're supposed to kind of, bow, right? And point your rod and shoot. Everything's happening so fast. I don't even have time to do that. And the fish is coming out of the water at breakneck speed. It was just incredible. And that led to about a 50-minute fight
Wow.
before we were able to get it in. And, at times I was like, you know what, I'm about ready to tap out. This fish is absolutely winning. But you do learn how to fight the fish. There's a science to that. But I got to touch it, so forget about, just catching it and breaking off. I actually got to, touch and hold that fish. And I'm honestly still on, cloud nine to this day. And Alex told me I would get hooked, no pun intended. And I would catch the disease if I caught one. And I absolutely have it. I've gone out and, bought some books and stuff, just trying to really learn as much as I can about the sport of tarpon fishing in South Florida, and can't wait to get back down there and chase those things.
Well, I know you're going to Belize. Are you going to be? I don't know where tarpon live. What are you chasing? I'm a
They
freshwater
do live in
guy.
Belize.
They do live
They
in Belize.
do.
Okay, so are
Yeah,
you
they
going
do live in
tarpon? Are you
Belize too.
specifically going after tarpon on your Belize
So
trip?
it's interesting. I'm sure we will target some tarpon because I'm also opportunistic, right? I just want to
Oh,
get on fish too. But I'm really trying to target permit. I've caught bonefish. I've now caught a tarpon, and a nice tarpon on top of that, 100 pounds. I kind of left that out, which is, a good size adult. It's not the biggest, but it's a really nice fish to catch for your first time on a fly.
amazing.
Um, but the permit is, one of those saltwater species again. That's a bucket list fish, but it's a real challenge to catch. And so, as much as I can, I'm going to spend time really trying to chase permit, but also again, be opportunistic with,
Sure.
what the water gives us. AJ, my son, is going out for the first time, so he will fish at least a half a day with me, and he's going to be throwing the fly. He just got some lessons. Big shout out to Mad River Outfitters in Ohio, Columbus, Ohio, for looking out for Jay. And so I'm probably the most excited, other than having all three of my kids, for a week where we get to hang out. But that I get to fish with my son, and my hope is that he's gonna kind of fall for it, especially if he hooks on a bonefish and that thing takes off. I think he will be like me, and what I'm envisioning is us having the opportunity to really have some quality time outdoors on the water, together.
Absolutely, those are some good times, cherished times. I'm just a small river guy myself, so there may be at some point.
I like small rivers
like
too.
I
I
say,
like big rivers.
I'm 76, so my shadow's growing a little long here. Whether I ever get to chase species like that is still a
Yeah.
little. It's out there, but I have to. So two things. We also have soccer in common. One of our four children fell in love with soccer. Our youngest fell in love with soccer. I never played the game of soccer. It wasn't even in my high school or any high school when I left.
Right.
They didn't play soccer. Anyhow, she got into soccer when she was very little. I ended up inheriting the team, coaching her team of
Yep.
all girls. Never coached girls before.
Love
So
it.
we could talk about that on another, at another time. What that was like.
I
Um,
look forward to it.
yeah, because talk about learning curve. The fact that there's nothing better, in my opinion, than fishing with family. There's just nothing like it. I'm talking both blood family now and
Yes.
extended family. There's just
Yes.
nothing
Agree.
better. But I also know this about you. You did have an experience of fishing in South Africa,
Yes.
and just so
Yes.
happens that South Africa is my adopted home. I've been very fortunate. I taught at University of Pretoria in
Mm.
2003, and then down to Western Cape in 2005. Did a little bit of time down there. Then I took 18 students from the place I retired from, the university I retired from, on a study abroad trip back to Cape Town. But I can tell you that in 2003, real quick, I was interested in going on a fly fishing trip somewhere. So one of my colleagues took me to a mall, and we spent about an hour looking for anything related to fly fishing. They were not a fly fisher, and in 2003, we found this little corner in this huge sporting goods store that had flies, and it was amazing. Well, make a long story short,
Yeah.
the industry hadn't picked up. The fly fishing was in its infancy in 2003. I had to put it that way.
Right.
I went back again, and 2 years later, all of a sudden, South Africa is making their own rods, their own
Yep.
reels, and
Own
and there's
reels.
fly shops.
Yep.
In 2 years, that exploded in South Africa. So I'm really happy. I'm happy to see that. What was your experience like? Where did you go, and who did you fish with?
Yeah, you know what? And I should have done a little bit of homework on both of those, because
Well,
he's going to kill me, because I cannot remember the name of the guide's
that's all right.
name that I went with. But, one, I was going on the trip, took my kids on a game drive in Kruger National Park, flew
Sure.
into Joburg, spent a night there. Joburg, obviously being rich in history, as is the whole country,
Yes.
frankly.
Yes.
Um, and just got to see just some incredible sightings right during the game
Mhm.
drive. So just quite a way to kind of set up the trip for them. But then we made our way out to the Western Cape, which I had not been, and I've been to South Africa several times before this trip. I've had the opportunity to do that through work, and that's where I kind of tied in some of that, or mixed business with
Yeah.
pleasure, if you will, to your point earlier in the discussion. But prior to coming out there, I started doing some homework to try to figure out, could I, do some fly fishing out there? And there's clearly, saltwater fishing.
Yes.
Um, but I was really interested in, trying to catch some trout, because the other thing that really got my eye is at certain times of the year where we were fishing, there's also smallmouth bass,
Yeah.
right? Once the
Mhm.
water temps get to a certain
Mhm.
level, you can also catch smallmouth bass. And
Mhm.
for me, that would have been an absolute thrill to say that, hey, I caught a smallmouth bass in South Africa. But what I can tell you is the setting was breathtaking. Breathtaking. You're kind of in a valley, and you've got two, what I would call small mountains on either side of you, and just tree lined with rocks and things of that sort. But then just this pristine river, and they have sections. I forget exactly what they call them, but in any given section, because you're part of a club, there can only be like two anglers in there at a given time. And on this day, we were fishing on a weekday, so we actually had the entire stretch to ourselves. I think there were four sections in this stretch, and it's named after an animal that again is escaping me, because you'll see those animals from time to time in the hills, if you will. But it was just for me again one of those experiences that I won't forget anytime soon.
That's awesome. I was supposed to go on a trip, but the person that was going to take me ended up sick the day of the trip, so it got canceled. So I've yet to do that, but I know enough about the freshwater fishing and so forth in the country to be dangerous. Now I have to ask,
Right.
so where you were fishing, were you guided by black South Africans or white South Africans?
No, it was a white South African.
Mhm. Because we know that, and you mentioned it, and it should not escape anyone here that the land in South Africa is private. There are game reserves, but
Yep.
if you're gonna, it's not like our public lands. You just don't go out and
Not at all. You just
no,
that's exactly
no,
right.
no.
Yep.
So, and that's a whole different story that we could definitely go
That's
into.
right. That
And
we can touch on at another
yeah, yeah.
podcast.
But one of the interesting things is if that industry is really going to, because now they're promoting themselves as the fly fishing destination in the world. I've seen
Yeah.
some marketing of them as the fly fishing destination in the world, and I've also gone so far as to watch some of the footage that they use in their promoting that, right? And
Yep.
recently, I've seen some footage of here's this white angler, right, being guided by a black South African,
Black South African.
right? But in the background, you see a white South African, or knowing that the black South African who's guiding you has no way to ever own that business currently. Like they're
That's right.
so again, they're being the guides like they are in game reserves, like they do the work.
That's exactly right.
And
That's
um,
exactly right.
when I was in the game reserve, we were looking for cheetah, and
Yeah.
we were in a car, and I was being driven around by a white South African colleague at the university, and we happened to turn the corner, and there's a big truck, and and there's all these black South Africans in the back. The driver happened to be white, but the workers in the back were black, and they were throwing out hindquarters of zebra to
Trying
chum,
to attract.
basically. Yeah, so that the
Yeah.
tourists could see them. And I'm thinking, these brothers are covered in blood. So,
If they're
so
not careful,
if they're not
they could be
careful,
dinner.
they could be dinner. Correct, correct. So, anyways,
Right.
South Africa's come a long way in that regard. But the next evolution,
They have.
right? The next evolution, we hope anyway, is that black folk will not be guides but also owners of the industry, which kind of I want that to segue into our kind of our last bit of time together, because
Yeah.
I could,
Yeah.
I could visit with you for hours, and I think we have actually
Likewise.
in the past, but we'll do that again. Um, so you've had all of this vast experience. You've had freshwater experience. You've had saltwater experience, and you fish in some of the most beautiful places um, in the world, and you're still doing it. What Al, has been your biggest takeaway or experience as a black fly angler in all of this stuff?
It's sorry, I cut you off. Go
No,
ahead.
no. That's just my question as us, right? Doing this thing
Yeah.
that we love to do, where we love to do it. Um, could you share what it's been like for you?
Yeah, I think so. I'll answer this probably in a few ways or a few parts, if you will. The
Sure.
first, as a black fly angler, um, oftentimes, and it's like being in the corporate world. I am
Sure.
an N of one, if you will, right?
Mhm.
So in other words, when I'm traveling wherever I'm going to, I am typically the only black fly angler. There was one occasion where I was up at the on the Pier Marquette in Michigan with a friend who happens to be black, and his family has some land up there, and he's been fishing up there forever for salmon during the salmon run. And here we are in this, this boat together with a guide, and it's kind of funny as you're we got out early in the day, so we were one of the first out, like at 5:30 a.m. right before it's even light. So the guide wanted to get in a good stretch of the river. And so, there were many boats coming through, but as we left, you're going through now all those boats that were passing you early and stuff like that. And it's interesting to just see some of the looks on people's faces as you've got these two black fly anglers, which probably to boot, because a number of folks are, you know, in fact, probably most of them were throwing spin gear. And so not only do you have these two black anglers, but they're also, fly fishing. So I think, that's the perspective that, as a black fly angler of, kind of being the only one at times. And sometimes, and this is, the way I look at this, I've made a lot of good friends,
Sure.
right, on the water and just getting involved in fly fishing. And they'll say, hey, do you want to go on this trip? There's going to be 10 people or so. And oftentimes I say no. um, and I know they start to wonder why, but part of it is because when you are the only one, I don't want to put myself in a situation, especially
Sure.
where I'm, let's say 10 hours away,
Mhm.
and you're just not as comfortable. Maybe there's the individual that likes to tell jokes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I don't ever want to be in that situation where I'm not in control, right? And
Sure.
either can't remove myself at that given time, because it would just ruin the trip for me. And that's, look, I haven't experienced that, and it may not happen, but it is the
Yeah.
way in which I think. So I try to fish, with small groups, individuals I know, where I don't have to worry about that as much. So that's maybe one of my perspectives, if it makes sense. Now, I think the second piece, what my experience has been, and I'm truly thankful for the sport finding me, if you will, and Chad introducing me to the sport, is realizing how good it is for your mental, emotional, and physical well-being
Mhm.
to be outside, and especially fly fishing, standing in the middle of a river, or if you're on the front of a skiff, or whatever the case may be. But how healthy it is for me, and the way in which it reduces my stress. And I think it's also opened me up to everything that's kind of gone on around you. You become much more aware. It's like your senses become heightened. But I have such an appreciation for all the life that's happening on around me, or happening around me. It's not just about
Yeah.
me. And I'm talking about, whether I'm seeing deer or wild turkey or eagles. Just the other day, I caught some photos of an eaglet, and it's sitting on the edge of
I,
the
I
nest.
I
And
saw that. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, so it's all those things that just enrich me as a person. So it's just, it's really healthy,
Hmm.
for me and my body and
Absolutely.
my mind. Um,
Absolutely.
I think the only other thing I would say, that the third piece is what I have found, and it kind of contradicts a little bit of what I'm saying, or at least what my fear is on the first one, that I mentioned. Is just everybody seems to be friendly
Sure.
when I'm out on the water. The outdoors community, and I'm really, especially talking about the fly fishing community. Everybody seems to be friendly.
Yeah.
Um, and treat each other with respect for the most part. And I appreciate that. And they're inclusive in that way. And I really appreciate that. And so that's just even a lesson for me to make sure um, I'm treating others how I want to be treated and how I've been treated out on the water.
Yeah. No, Al, you're spot on here, and all of the different anglers, black and brown anglers that I've talked to, been able to reach through Ubuntu, basically say something very similar. That it's not that we've necessarily been treated badly. It's
Right.
it's the subtle, sometimes the looks, the stares, like why are they here kind of thing. And also
Yeah.
it's unfortunate that we, even though we haven't had the experience, but we have the anticipation of the experience,
That's right.
or we have to think about whether to go on a trip or not. When many of our colleagues and friends, white friends, like, yeah, hey, yeah, let's go do this, let's go there, and
Yep.
but in our minds, it's like, I think I'll pass on that. And thank you very much for the invitation. So that
Right. And
yeah, I appreciate
if I could, Bob,
that. Yeah,
I'll tell you, it's the first time I've really talked about it, and so I'm hoping, some of my friends who are majority group members
sure.
or whatever, listen to this and they'll hear it and understand, and then I think we can probably have a conversation from there. And I hope they listen to it with an open mind and say, I get it. I would have never thought about it. But to your point, it's not that it's necessarily happened. It's
Right.
actually happened in other environments,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Whether it be work or, personal or whatever the case may be. But it's like you said, it's the anticipation. And so you're trying to remove yourself from having to be in a scenario like that.
You know what I've often thought of? It's hard to fish with armor on. It's
Mm,
hard to fish with armor. To
yeah,
always be
yeah.
thinking, so we don't want to. We don't want to have to
That's right.
fish
That's
wearing
right.
armor. It's it's not a good thing to think about lugging around all the armor of what might happen, or I have to be cautious about here and there. We don't want that to happen. And I'm also with you, man. Some of my dearest and closest friends are majority folks, and who
Yep.
have helped me and even helped
Yep.
this very thing happen that we're doing right now. So then, last question, Al, and then
Yeah.
whatever else you want to add here, because I really, really appreciate your time. What would you like to see change? And maybe you answered this, but I'll give it to you this way. What would you like to see changed in the industry, if anything?
Yeah. You know what? I think for me, the first thing that always comes to mind, um, and it's been this way my entire life when, you live, um, how do I want to say it? The lived experience of a person of color or a minority.
Sure.
The obvious thing for me is the representation in probably all facets of the industry, right? Whether you're talking about manufacturers, retailers, even guides, you kind of brought that up,
Mm-hmm.
those owning outfitting services, right? Where they host, kind of uh, destination trips, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
even to advertising or publications. Um, and for me, I think it's very simple. You know, diversity is a strength, inclusion is a strength, and there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that it is good for the sport. And you see it, and you're seeing pieces of it. There's some retailers or organizations that I think are doing a pretty good job of it, and I think it makes a difference. It's only going to help the sport grow
Absolutely.
for the better, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think everyone wins in that situation, and that's the thing, the kind of obvious thing that comes to mind to me when you talk about change.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you're a part of that change right now,
I hope so.
accepting not only the way you're living your life and doing what you love to do where you love to do it. You also agreed to be on this show with me, which is what Ubuntu is all about, right? I
Ubuntu,
mean,
that's
we're
right.
we're about uh, at our heart and core changing the complexion of this industry, making us who are typically invisible Well, as one of my friends said, the thing that we have going for us is we're either invisible or we're hyper visible. We're either invisible or we're like standing out like a sore thumb, right?
That's a
As you,
really good way to
as you
put it.
mentioned, and that's not the everyday experience of a lot of folks that we know and we love. So,
Yeah, that's right.
well,
That's right.
man, I appreciate that. That's what this whole show's about. Real, getting real with our guest, and
Yeah, yeah.
Al was hit it. Now, so, any final thoughts here before we sign off for now? Because I know you and I
Yeah,
we're gonna
we could
chop it
go
up.
on.
We're gonna chop it up some more at some point. Especially,
You,
I'd like to
you,
talk to you when you get back from Belize and the Green River,
absolutely.
which is in Wyoming, but you got to get there through sometimes Utah.
Through
Get through,
that's right.
you can get
Through
there other
salt.
ways, but
That's right.
most people fly into Salt Lake and get there. So.
That's right. That's exactly what we're doing too. I was thinking, about Ubuntu, um, or Ubuntu,
Mm-hmm.
excuse me,
That's okay.
and the meaning,
Mm-hmm.
of essentially kind of humanity towards others,
Yes,
right?
yes,
Um, in an environment where we are today, where it's so divisive, um, or divided, if you will, I think the the outdoor community, the fly fishing community, has an opportunity in some ways, to kind of really be a model for the rest, right, of our society, because I really do believe there is a strong community that's inclusive, that's in welcoming in or that's welcoming in most ways, right? And I appreciate that, and I hope that we, through our social media connections or the network, etc., can be an example for the rest of, our society, to say this
yeah,
this is how it's done. This is how you treat people, and that, um, we're stronger together than we
absolutely,
ever are apart.
absolutely. I really appreciate that shout out to Ubuntu. When it's boiled down to its core, Ubuntu is I am because we are. I am
Yes,
because we are. Well, this has been amazing. Thank you so much, Al, for taking the time. Your transparency, your willingness to get real on our show. I really
on the real.
appreciate on the real. We've been on the real.
I love it.
So a huge amount of thanks, and please let's connect when you get back from your trip because I want to hear all about it. So just send me a message. Say I'm back. Let's talk. 'Cause I want to
Absolutely.
hear about that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bob,
You're most
again for
welcome.
having me. I,
My
I
absolute pleasure.
I really appreciate it, and wish you much success with the podcast.
Thank you. Well, a huge thanks again to our guest, Albert Al White. So thank you for listening, everyone. You can also watch each episode on our YouTube channel. Follow us on Instagram at Ubuntu Fly Anglers on Instagram and UbuntuFlyAnglers.com on Facebook. You can also message me directly at UbuntuFlyAnglers@gmail.com. So thanks, everyone, for listening and watching. See you next time. Tight lines.